Welcome in to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube channel. Today I'm looking at some Dynasty buys. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Let's jump into our first player, Justin Herbert. So I'm not going to bore you by doing what I sometimes do and go through all of Justin Herbert's stats from his career. You don't need me to do that. We know that Justin Herbert is good, but we'll just look at his career stats. 66.6% completion, 114 touchdowns to 42 interceptions. That's really good. 7.1 yards per attempt. Also pretty solid. Why do we have Justin Herbert as a dynasty buy? It's because of all the negative vibes. There are a lot of negative vibes, and we can take advantage of that for a known good player with a big contract who's young, 26 years old. There are some injury concerns. There's a lack of weapons right now. Greg Roman's run-heavy offense. And the redraft rank pulling down the dynasty rank. Yes, Justin Herbert is currently dealing with a plantar fascia injury. Yes, that injury might affect him for all of this year. No, that injury is not a long-term problem. Neither are the Chargers' weapons. They did some salary cap movements to get rid of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. They are going to find another weapon to add to this team next year. They will have plenty of salary cap space to do it. As for Greg Roman's run-heavy offense, Greg Roman has coached for the majority of his NFL career, really as the majority quarterback for all of it except 1 year, has coached Lamar Jackson, Tyrod Taylor, and Colin Kaepernick. Of course, Greg Roman's offenses were run heavy. What would you do if you had Lamar Jackson, Tyrod Taylor, and Colin Kaepernick as your quarterbacks? I would run a run-heavy offense too. He didn't have Justin Herbert. He didn't have that. So I think this is going to be a little bit different. They don't have Derrick Henry. They're not going to be able to just run. I think we're going to see more passing than people are thinking. The reason I'm not in on Justin Herbert for redraft is because of the plantar fascia. The plantar fascia concerns me that he's not going to be able to run at all. But I still think this is an opportunity to buy low on a known elite talent. Now, how can you do that? I have seen some wild trades for Justin Herbert. Really wild. Here are some. It's a mix of suggestions and also things that I've seen on Dynasty Daddy's trade database. It's a great tool that I would suggest people use. I have seen many versions of this. Justin Herbert and 2 firsts for Josh Allen. You can get Justin Herbert and 2 firsts for Josh Allen. I love Josh Allen. Would I take this? Absolutely. Especially if I were rebuilding. Justin Herbert for A.J. Brown. In Superflex, would I like to acquire an elite quarterback for A.J. Brown, wide receiver, 27 years old. He's not old, but in terms of the age scale, I'd much rather have the quarterback. And then lastly, Jared Goff or Dak Prescott in the 25-second. You could use that to acquire Justin Herbert. I like those guys, but they're much older than Justin Herbert. They're not as elite as Justin Herbert. I think you'll be happy with this deal long-term to acquire Justin Herbert. Next up, Brian Thomas. Obviously, we can't look at Brian Thomas's NFL stats because he's rookie. He had an interesting career at LSU. Didn't do much in 2021. 28 catches, 359 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Didn't do much in 2022. 31 catches, 361 yards, and 5 touchdowns. But in 2023, he had an amazing season. 68 catches, 1,117 yards, and 17 touchdowns, which is insane. But it is a little bit concerning that he wasn't impressive until 2023 when he turned 21 years old in season. He did enough, though, to be a first-round pick for the Jaguars. Now, why is Brian Thomas a dynasty buy? Well, he's been hyped up in camp recently. He had great preseason usage, and he's developing chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. Thomas played all 9 snaps with the starters in the preseason game. Unlike Rome Odunze on the Bears, Thomas played in 12 personnel, as Christian Kirk remained a slot-only player. Gabe Davis was the other outside wide receiver in 12 personnel. I'm actually a little bit concerned about Kirk. That might be a story for another video. If he continues not to be able to get on the field in 12 personnel, I'm not sure Kirk is going to pay off on his ADP. But I'm not sure that people are going to notice these little things about Brian Thomas because he's still just wide receiver 29 on keep trade cut. I think this is a great time to capitalize on Brian Thomas. And there are some ways that I would suggest trading for him, which we can jump into. So Brian Thomas, of course, it's always hard to trade for a rookie who was just drafted, right? But here's some ways you might be able to do it. Could you buy Brian Thomas for 25 late first in one QB? In one QB, I'm okay sending a first for someone like Brian Thomas. Not doing that in Superflex because there's just too much risk with quarterbacks in the rookie draft. But in a one QB, I would absolutely do this. And then capitalize on a couple of players. Deebo Samuel is currently experiencing a gain in value because Brandon Ayuk might be traded. Deebo Samuel is already 28 years old, has injury history. I would love to turn Deebo Samuel into Brian Thomas in Dynasty. And then lastly, another player who's gotten some hype recently, Keon Coleman. While I like Keon Coleman is not nearly as good of a prospect as Brian Thomas. I would add a third to Keon Coleman to get Brian Thomas rather easily. And, if you think of another deal, put it in the comments. But I'm definitely looking to acquire more shares of Brian Thomas right now. Now, if you like my YouTube content, you should sign up for the Patreon. You get my rankings, access to the Discord, and the ability to ask in advance questions for the YouTube videos. Tiers begin at just $6 a month and include all of that. You can click on the link at the top right corner to sign up for the Patreon. Also, we're entering redraft and start sit season, which will only be covered on the Patreon. This YouTube channel will remain solely focused on Dynasty Fantasy Football. If you want to know more about the Patreon, check out my Why You Should Join the Patreon video on the channel. It'll explain everything I'm offering in more detail. I really appreciate everyone who signed up and any new patrons who join. With that said, let's jump into our next player, Brian Robinson. So Robinson's career stats are probably lower than they would have been if he hadn't been shot before his rookie year, which I still find to kind of be crazy that he was shot right before the rookie year in the knee and he came back and was as good as he was. I still find that to be something that's hard for me to believe, but he did do it. In 2022, 205 carries, 797 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3.9 yards a carry, and 9 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown in just 12 games. Robinson averaged 17.1 carries per game as a rookie. He was workhorse. Interestingly, though, from 2022 to 2023, he became a different player, taking less work but improving as a pass catcher and efficiency-wise. In 2023, he had just 178 carries, 733 yards, 5 touchdowns, 4.1 yards a carry, but 36 catches, 368 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So he improved through the air. Now, why am I recommending Brian Robinson as a dynasty buy? Austin Eckler, I think, still carries name value. I think if you asked your average person who's not really paying attention, who is the starter for the Commanders, they would say Austin Eckler. I also think Brian Robinson kind of is looked as boring, didn't really deliver league-winning performances over the last 2 years. However, Robinson toiled away in the disastrous Commanders offense in 2022 and 2023. But now he has Jaden Daniels, who will open up the rushing game. Austin Eckler was cooked last year, at least on the ground. Eckler had 3.3 true yards a carry, 62nd among running backs, while Robinson had 4.0, 35th among running backs. Now, that's not great, but it's a lot better than Eckler. Interestingly, Robinson averaged more yards per route run than Eckler, 1.72 to 1.55, which are both really good, actually. But Robinson was even better. And Robinson is still affordable at just running back 26 on keep trade cut. I will just say that also some camp buzz about Robinson being involved in the passing game. I really think Austin Eckler is more of a change of pace player. I have no interest in Austin Eckler whatsoever. And I think Brian Robinson is definitely the player you want in this backfield. I'm very confident about that. Now, as for buying Brian Robinson, usually sending picks for these types of running backs is hard. Usually the way I get them is by sending another player that other people like, maybe I don't like as much. Some deals recently, these were all from Dynasty Daddy. Could you buy Brian Robinson for Jalen Wright? I mean, I like Jalen Wright, but he's buried on that depth chart. I'd rather have Brian Robinson, who's a starter. Brian Robinson for Jermaine Burton, a player I have significant concerns with. I might want to do that. And then Brian Robinson for Najee Harris. Najee Harris, I mean, I really have no interest in Najee Harris. I'm not sure that he's the starter over Jalen Warren. I'm much more confident that Brian Robinson is the starter over Austin Eckler. So for those reasons, I'd much rather have Brian Robinson over Najee Harris. Now, I want to cover JJ McCarthy. I happen to have a Patreon question about that. So we're going to jump into that. With the JJ McCarthy injury, are you buying low and what for? It's so tough to discuss buying JJ McCarthy as it just dropped, I believe, a few minutes ago. He's out for the season after his meniscus repair. Quarterbacks who don't see the field at all or barely see the field as rookies are very dangerous assets, very risky. Before the injury, I had McCarthy as quarterback 19, behind Drake May, but ahead of Bryce Young. I don't know. I mean, it's easy to drop McCarthy below Young now, but you have guys like Deshaun Watson, Baker Mayfield, Bo Nix. I mean, I like McCarthy a lot better than Nix. Guys like Kirk Cousins, Will Levis. McCarthy was extremely young. He still is, turns 22 years old in January 2025. The Vikings will still have great weapons in 2025. Justin Jefferson's locked in. Jordan Addison will be in year 3. TJ Hawkinson will still just be 28 years old and healthy. So that hasn't changed. So yes, in a rebuild, it's hard to buy JJ McCarthy as a contender. We know he will give you nothing this year. In a rebuild, yes, I would buy JJ McCarthy. If I somehow had something like Kirk Cousins or Will Levis, who I don't believe in, or Matthew Stafford, these are ways. Take a quarterback who's playing this year and do some sort of trade for JJ McCarthy, because I still think JJ McCarthy is going to be the Vikings starter in 2025. I don't see how that's not going to be the case. Sam Darnold, I think, now has the opportunity to audition for a starting job elsewhere, but I don't think Sam Darnold is going to become the starter here. They're committed to JJ McCarthy. So with that said, yeah, I'm still in on JJ McCarthy. I would, look to buy him for some of those types of assets. I mean, if I could send like Derek Carr in a second for JJ McCarthy, I absolutely would, especially in a rebuild. So I guess the answer is yes, if it's cheap. Now, I'm going to get into the rest of the Patreon questions. So let's go to that now. In a 10-team, 1-quarterback league, how many quarterbacks would you carry? I generally don't have limits on things like that. Typically, I wouldn't target having more than 3 starting quarterbacks, but if I got 4 quarterbacks at a value, that's okay. Maybe I'd look to trade one away, though. So yeah, I'd lean towards 3 starters. I don't feel like I need more than 3 starters. With week 1 quickly approaching, do you have any advice for managers to capitalize on for buy sells? Yeah, everyone overreacts to every little piece of news. So if you can capitalize on overreactions to things that don't actually matter, do it. It does not matter who scored touchdowns in the preseason. Nobody cares. So yes, Dontavian Wicks probably just rose 3 rounds in ADP. If you can sell him for a second now, I would absolutely do that, if that's an example. When managing your roster, at what point do you consider it tinkering? Well, I'm always down to make more trades or more waiver claims, no matter how good my team is. It's tinkering if you're making bad moves. If you're doing bad things, if you're hurting your team, then it's tinkering. But otherwise, it's fine. I just don't want to make bad moves. I'm always down to make more good moves. Lastly, do you have any good rules or rubrics for how you trade on the clock? I know you generally want to trade back or into the future because the value's really there to trade up. That's true. And on the clock, you by definition cannot trade up because the picks have already happened. I would say patience. Be patient. Send a bunch of offers to trade down or into the future. Sometimes to trade out for a player. Explore all options to make sure you get the best deal. But yes, obviously trading on the clock, you're not trading up. So yeah, that's really my main advice. And be aggressive. Talk to every manager. Try to build a trade relationship with every other manager. That's the way you can get the best deals. Now, if you like the video, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. As always, the best way to support the channel is to subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notifications bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops. Of course, if you want my best fantasy football advice, it's available on the Patreon. Dynasty, redraft, start sit, and more. Every sign-up helps support my independent content. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.